Hello and welcome to part 2 of session 8 on Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine. We're going to start out this part talking about the idea of constitution. And this is a term and a concept that will apply across multiple different types of medicine that we study for the rest of the semester. So this is just an introduction to this concept. Ayurvedic is a constitutional form of medicine, and so in order to understand Ayurveda, it's important to understand that concept. So here we have a definition that is just a simple definition from a recent dictionary of or proceeding from the basic structure or nature of a person or thing, inherent. And so this is the inherent qualities that a person might have. And constitutional medicine is an approach to administering therapeutic agents based on the recognition of patterns of imbalance. And so we'll spend a lot of the rest of this session talking about how we discern patterns of imbalance and what they mean. It's important for us to realize that the term constitution has been used in both Western medicine and in Eastern medicine for long periods of time. However, it used to be that term was utilized pretty much the same across the world, and in modern conventional medicine, the term is actually used quite differently. So I'll just take a little bit of time to distinguish that. So you can think about whether you've ever heard of someone as having been referred to as having a strong or a weak constitution. And that used to be something that we might hear frequently as a person is described. And we can think about that now. We still think about people who have a lot of energy or very robust constitutionally. We might not use that word constitution, but we do know people around us that have a real robust energy to them. And that's a similar thing to thinking about a strong or a weak constitution. And that used to be used a lot in conventional Western medicine historically. So complementary medicine in the present uses the word constitution to mean the meanings that are there on the slide. And so those are the ones that are important for you to know. But as a contrast, now conventional medicine in the present uses the term constitution or constitutional to mean something quite different. And those are generally denoted as systemic symptoms that would affect a whole person. So, for example, fever or fatigue or weight loss due to illness would be considered constitutional symptoms. And so the word is really used in conventional medicine in the present to mean symptoms of illness that affect the entire person, that aren't just in one organ or one body system. So in Ayurveda, which is a 5-element based system, the constitution is based off of the 5 elements. And so we'll go through how the concept of constitution is developed within Ayurvedic theory. So first, there are 3 principles that uphold the cycle of life. There's the principle of creation, the principle of maintenance, and the principle of dissolution. So this is something being built, something being maintained, and something being broken down. And we can think about that in nature in terms of if we have a tree that puts leaves out in the spring, that is an element of creation. We have that tree keeping its leaves through the summer, and that's maintenance. And then in the autumn, it loses those leaves, and that's dissolution. Those leaves fall to the forest floor and turn into compost and break down. So in the cycles of nature, we see this, and we also see this within the human organism as well. And the creative principle is said to give rise to the 5 essential elements of nature. And in this system, the 5 elements are water, earth, fire, air, and ether. And so we see a similarity to the 4 elements that we studied in the last lecture from the native North American framework. Water, air, fire, and earth are the same. And Ayurveda has this additional element of space or ether. And that is something of no substance, right? And the 5 elements are said to make up all organic and non-organic things and control all biological and psychological functions of the body, mind, and consciousness within a person, as well as the cycles of nature, etc. The 5 emotions that correspond to the 5 elements are anger, compassion, fear, greed, and love. And so the elements are said to steer our emotions or have dominance, or not dominance, have influence over the emotions or be related. So each human being is a unique phenomenon of cosmic consciousness that manifests as a mixture of all 5 elements. So all of us are made up of all 5 of these elements, as is everything in nature. And there's a different balance for each individual person. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we proceed. So we'll use this image on this slide and the upcoming slides. For right now, just notice the 5 elements which are noted in the 5 points of the star here. So we have ether, earth, water, fire, and air, making up the 5 points of the star. From the concept of the elements, we come up with the constitutional types in Ayurveda. And so the 5 elements will come together in different combinations to create what are called the 3 doshas. And the 3 doshas are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So we can see from the schematic here, we have Vata made up of air and ether. So that's a very light and insubstantial dosha. We have earth being made up of, sorry, I'm losing control of my cursor. We have earth being made up of, Kapha being made up of earth and water. So that's a heavier, wetter type of constitution. And then we have Pitta being made up of fire and water. So that's a bit explosive in some ways. If you think about what it's like to splash water, flick water onto a fire and the sizzling that takes place, you can get a sense of that. And a person's constitution is determined based upon which dosha or doshas are dominant in them. And we'll talk about the different constitutions in a minute. So these doshas are also referred to as humors, which sort of implies that they have a fluid quality to them. And they are similar to the humors as recognized in Greco-Roman medicine, which we will talk about in a couple of weeks, and which will follow then through European medical history, because the 4 humors were the basis of Western medicine for a very long period of time. So of the doshas, Vata, and you'll remember Vata is made up of air and ether. This governs motion, communication, mental function, the nervous system, physical activity, and thinking. So this is a movement-based dosha. All things about it are movement-related. So if you think about the function of the nervous system and how fast a nervous impulse travels along a nerve, this is very quick. It has a spark to it, and it's very lively, right? So the qualities of Vata are dryness, cold, light, quick, rough, unstable, and subtle. Pitta, on the other hand, is going to be more of a fiery and a bit aggressive, assertive sort of dosha. It governs digestion, absorption, assimilation, metabolism, heat, sweating, and enzyme activity. So if you think about this in terms of Western science, we've got a lot of biochemical pathways and physiological processes, complex processes that are governed by Pitta. Its qualities are hotness, moisture, light, fluid, sour, sharp, and penetrating. And then we have Kapha, and Kapha governs growth and lubrication, gross structures of body, form, joints, bones, and ligaments. And so Kapha is the heaviest, most substantial of the doshas. And you think about it in terms of its elements are water and earth. So there's that substance to it, and you can relate to that in the substance of the body, the joints and the bones and ligaments, and the real substance of what the body's made up of. And its qualities are heavy, cold, wet, slow, steady, soft, oily, and sweet. So each person has a mixture of all of these doshas, and most people have either 1 or 2 doshas that tend to be more dominant. And every individual's constitution has its own unique balance of these. So no one is quite exactly the same, but we all have some similarities in terms of the patterns that can be distinguished, and that is what implies constitutional medicine here. And so the doshas being referred to as humors, like we said before, they have a fluid nature to them, and the different constitutions that are made up from them. There are 7 constitutions, and we'll go through those 7 constitutions just shortly as after we finish going through the individual doshas. So the next 3 slides are just a nice summary for each dosha of the different types of qualities of a person, both physical, temperamental, and other things that are related to each one of the doshas. And like I said, again, it's really important to emphasize that even if you have one dosha that is dominant, everybody is still a combination of all 3 doshas. And so we all have qualities of each of them, but we all tend to have, or not all of us, but most people tend to have a dominance of 1 or 2 of the doshas. So you can go through these slides in your own time. I won't go through and read every one of these correspondences to you because that would get a bit dry, but we'll just have you go through these slides on your own as you wish and explore the different qualities that are associated with each. And for each one, I'll just pull out a couple of interesting things to note that are interesting that you can observe from the outside of a person. So an example here would be a body frame of being very short or very tall in a Vata person. They also tend to be thin and have quite a narrow frame. So you can think of somebody that you know who has maybe kind of a willowy or lanky kind of body structure. Tend to have trouble keeping weight on, but when they do have weight gain, it tends to be around the middle rather than in the limbs, so they tend to stay quite thin in their limbs. Their mental makeup tends to be quite sharp, but they can go out of focus and get kind of blurry when they're under stress. And also under stress, the things that are related to excess movement or not enough movement in the body tend to come out. So insomnia, which is too much activity in the mind sometimes, or constipation, which is not enough movement in the bowels. So you'll notice that the things under stress there are related to movement, either movement in the mind, movement in the body, or imbalances of body fluids, because Vata will tend to be quite dry. So dry nails, brittle nails, or dry hair, dry skin. Pitta tends to be quite fiery. Fire is obviously one of the elements associated with Pitta. And so you can have excessive sweating with Pitta or excessive body heat. You can get redness in the face. You might have even redness in the hair. So you tend to be able to see that fire. Pitta tends to have freckled skin, but not always, and is more prone to having moles. They're also prone to having prematurely gray hair. And we might think of that as being kind of an aspect of perhaps burnout, so driving too hard. Think about somebody who might have overworked for most of their life, and we associate the development of gray hair with perhaps getting a bit burned out. Pitta will tend towards, opposite to Vata, will tend towards diarrhea, and we mentioned that diarrhea is one of the ways that we can clear heat from the body in one of our prior lectures. And Pittas will tend to be of a medium build and tend to be more toned or of athletic build and have more muscle, and will carry a somewhat of a moderate weight, but will tend to gain weight easily. So if a Pitta person is not getting enough exercise in their life, and moderate exercise is the best for Pitta to not push too hard, but they will tend to gain weight easily if they don't have enough movement in their life. Kapha, as I said, tends to be the heaviest of the doshas, and so you will see this more in the body frame of a Kapha person as well. tending to have a really relatively heavy or tending towards overweight, but also big joints, big bones, well lubricated joints. They tend to have a good freedom of movement due to that good juiciness in the joints there, and have a tendency towards weight gain in the trunk, as well as in the thighs and arms. So a more evenly distributed weight gain all over the body. Kapha, when out of balance, will tend to go towards not enough movement. So we'll tend to oversleep and not move very much and be victim of inertia and tend towards laziness or sloth, we might say. So it's important for a Kapha person to keep going and to get quite generous exercise in order to keep things moving, because they don't tend towards movement. But not tending towards movement, they also tend to have a more stable temperament and tend to be more balanced in their temperament, more calm, perhaps more contemplative. But that can also lead to stubbornness as well. And I'm sure that you know people in your own life, or maybe yourself, that might have that tendency towards lack of movement, and sometimes that turns into digging your heels in. So again, the balance of the doshas will govern all metabolic activities, but each one of the doshas has a different aspect of metabolism that it will govern. So Kapha governs anabolism, and for those of you who haven't had perhaps biochemistry yet or organic chemistry, anabolism is the building of new structures in the body. So you might know the term anabolic, and sometimes you hear that with regard to steroid drugs. Anabolism means the building processes in the body, so building muscle, building new tissue when you need it. That is governed by the Kapha dosha. The Vata dosha governs catabolism. Those are the breaking down functions of the body. That can be everything from breaking down toxins or breaking down biochemicals in the body, like we break down estrogen, for example, in our liver in order to remove it from the body. We also break down food, obviously, but that more falls under the Pitta dosha. So catabolism tends to be the breakdown processes of the body tissues or cellular processes. So we have our cells that die on a regular basis and are regenerated. We have blood cells that die on a regular basis and are regenerated. So we need to have that breakdown to balance the building function. And then we have Pitta, which is metabolism, and you can think about that as the functions that generate heat in the body from the nutrients that we ingest, and that's a good way to conceptualize metabolism if you haven't had biochemistry yet and know all of the metabolic pathways. So the balance of the doshas is what creates the natural order in the body, and balance is what creates health. And it also creates a balance of our temperaments, and it determines our behavioral patterns or our personality in many different ways. So as I mentioned, there are 7 constitutional types. I'll go through those quickly because they are the different combinations of the doshas. So there are the single dosha constitutional types of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. That's 3 of them. And then you have the ones that are a combination of 2 doshas. So Vata, Pitta, Vata, Kapha, and Pitta, Kapha are the 3 others. And then there's tridoshic constitution, which is a combination of all 3 doshas. Those are the people that tend to have the doshas relatively in balance, or they go out of balance in different ways across all 3 of the doshas. And that's relatively rare. Most people are either a single dosha constitution or a combination of 2. But again, regardless of what person's constitution, we all have to have all 3. Otherwise, we would be so out of balance that we wouldn't be able to maintain life. And so that's important to keep reminding ourselves, because oftentimes if you place a label on a person, whether that's yourself or someone else, that is, you're this constitution or that constitution, sometimes it's easy to forget that the other ones are still there, and it's important that they all receive attention. And so each individual's constitution will determine their specific susceptibilities to illness, as well as what are the appropriate treatments for them to bring them back into balance once they are ill or out of balance, and what their prognosis is for recovery. And the constitution is established at birth, and it remains constant throughout the lifetime. So it's something that you can rely upon in terms of both diagnosis and treatment if you get it right. And the state of health exists when all three doshas are in equilibrium. So just because, say, I'm a Pitta dosha, I might have an imbalance of kapha sometimes, and that might be discerned by having excess mucus, for example, too much mucus being produced in my chest or in my sinuses or in my gastrointestinal tract. And it's important for me to bring that back into balance. If I'm a Pitta constitution, there might be a different way of bringing that back into balance than if I'm a Kapha constitution. But just because I'm a Pitta constitution doesn't mean that Kapha can't be out of balance in me. So bringing all three of them back into balance is the way towards health. And so we think about the constitution as being the doshas will govern the continuous pathophysiological changes in the body and also how the body tends to respond to those changes. But the other thing that the constitution or the doshas will respond to is external influences like the weather or emotional stress. Well, that's more internal, but it can be caused from the outside. So say something traumatic happens to us, as well as the types of foods that we eat, etc. And we'll talk more about that as we move through the rest of this lecture. The core backbone here is that health is an ordered state or balanced state of the doshas, and disease is an imbalanced or disordered state of the doshas. And so within the body or within nature even, there is an interaction between order and disorder, and the key is figuring out how to live one's life. We talked about Ayurveda being the science of life or the science of longevity, healthy living. The key here is figuring out how to live one's life in alignment with one's constitution in order to maintain that balance, or when something happens to push yourself out of balance, how to bring yourself back into balance as quickly as possible. Digestion and elimination are also big keys to health in the Ayurvedic system, and we see this across many of the different whole medical systems that we will study this semester. Digestion and elimination are really the key to health here. So in Ayurveda, Agni is the digestive fire. The key to good health, as I said, it covers all functions of the digestive system. So if we think about all of the different parts of our digestive system, everything from chewing our food and salivation of the food all the way through the entire gastrointestinal tract and out the other end, including the liver and detoxification processes, as well as the immune functions that are associated with our GI tract. And at the time that the system of Ayurveda was being developed, certainly they didn't have necessarily a knowledge of the immune system and how it functioned from an anatomical and physiological standpoint within the gut, but we know a lot more about that now, and it turns out that a lot of their theories really match up with that science. So inadequate digestive strength will lead to buildup of toxins, and toxins are collectively referred to as ama in the system, and that leads to disease. It's interesting to note here that if you want a clue as to how much ama you might have in your system, one of the main diagnostic factors is looking at the tongue. And a thick white coating on the tongue will indicate a large buildup of ama in the system. And so you can examine your own tongue and check that out. So Agni, or the digestive fire, is also responsible for digestion and assimilation of ideas and emotions. And we see this in Chinese medicine as well, although it's not called Agni, but the digestive function of the body is seen to not just be about digesting things that go in the mouth, but also things that come in through the senses, such as sounds and sights and ideas and new knowledge. All has to be processed, as well as the processing of emotion. And so that's all wound up in this digestion and assimilation function in Ayurveda. There are 3 waste products that are said to be generated through the digestion and elimination, and that is sweat, feces, and urine. This comports with Western science as well, and it's appropriate that all of these be eliminated. It's vital that all of these be eliminated appropriately. So sweating is important. Regular defecation, very important, regular urination, and not suppressing any of these functions, also very important. And then apana, so we know the expression of prana, and prana governs the upward moving energy in the body. The opposite of prana is apana, and that governs the downward moving energy in the body, and that facilitates elimination, as well as other downward moving functions such as menstruation, for example. So according to Ayurveda, health is defined by the body, mind, emotions, and spirit being in a state of order or balance, with the doshas being in equilibrium, with Agni, the digestive fire, functioning in a balanced way, and with waste products being eliminated and produced and eliminated properly. This results in a harmony of mind, of senses, and of consciousness towards higher existence. So I mentioned this in the last session, that the real purpose of health is to bring us to being able to interact and fulfill our higher purpose in life or on the planet. And so we have that imbalance in any one of these, in the body, mind, emotions, or spirit, any disturbance there, that's where the disease process is said to begin. So the image here on this slide is of Nagarjuna. He's a medical writer who wove Hinduism throughout his Ayurvedic texts. And it's important to note that one of the main goals in health is really to continue one's karmic evolution. And so he wove the idea of karma and also reincarnation, etc., to developing oneself into a higher level of consciousness as a facet of health or a purpose of health. The causes of imbalance or disease are important to note because removing the causes of imbalance is one of the keys to getting back into balance again. And so causes are seen as being improper diet or personal habits or lifestyle. So again, referring back to the meaning of Ayurveda, which is the science of life or living or longevity. Incompatible food combinations. Certain foods are said to be incompatible to be eaten together. Seasonal changes, or even the changes in the weather from day to day that can push us off of balance. Repressed emotions and stress, so not processing and finding outlets, positive outlets for our emotions, or driving ourselves too hard or having other stressful events that happen in our lives. These all are said to push the doshas out of balance so that one or more of the doshas will become aggravated or deranged. And it's important to note that oftentimes, whether a person is of a Vata constitution or not, Vata might be the first dosha to go out of balance. And part of that is because Vata is the dosha that is responsible for movement. And so when something is either moving too much or not moving enough, as you can imagine that a state of imbalance might create a change in whether something is moving or not moving too much or not moving enough, we'll tend to put Vata out of balance first. And so oftentimes, and we'll see this a little bit later in treatment, bringing Vata back into balance is oftentimes a key of treatment. And then that imbalance is said to negatively impact the Agni and produce Ama, and the buildup of toxins will end up cultivating disease in the body. So this is relating to the internal environment of the body as well, and we're talking about really homeostasis here, maintaining the body in balance. And you can have the perturbation from the outside or from the inside. So the doshas then are in constant flux. They're constantly responding to changes in the input that we have, and you will either have that constant input be within a range that allows your body to naturally maintain balance, or you will have a series of inputs into the system that will push it too hard and will outstrip the ability of the doshas to keep it in balance. So as an example, If I am in relatively good balance and I go out to dinner and I have a meal that is perhaps has too much chili in it. I've put too much heat into my system, and perhaps my system doesn't necessarily deal with excess heat all that well. If I'm still in relatively good balance, I might have a temporary sort of blip on my radar screen, taking me out of balance and having too much heat in my body, and then my body will be able to clear that, especially if I do some things to help to bring it back into balance. But say I'm overworking and I'm really stressed out and I've had an emotional upheaval in my personal life, and that's caused me to have to undergo some stressed eating, and I've eaten a bunch of food over a number of days that are that's improper for my constitution. I might be then outstripping my body's ability to bring itself back into balance. And if I continue that for long enough, then I may go into a diseased state. If we keep that up for even longer, especially if we keep ourselves in sort of a constant chronic state of imbalance and bring that into a place where the body's just really not able to bring itself back into balance again, then I'm really exacerbating or speeding up the process of degeneration or aging, even if I'm not pushing myself all the way into a disease state by doing that. So further on in this process down the track, as AMA enters the bloodstream, it is said to clog the channels, and this causes retention of toxins in the blood, and that results in toxemia. And so we have accumulated toxicity in the system, and that will slowly affect prana, which is our vital life energy or our life force, our ojas, which is our immunity, and we know this as we get more stressed or more toxic or more out of balance, our immune system doesn't tend to cope, and we tend to get sick easier or quicker. And then tejas, which is our cellular metabolic energy, and that is it's related to digestive fire, related to pitta, but not the same thing. It is at the cellular level what's going on to both generate energy and rid our body of toxins at the cellular level. So all diseases in Ayurveda are said to be somewhat of a crisis of ama toxicity, and that is why a lot of the treatments in Ayurveda are really focused on reducing toxicity in the system, and that can be by removing the causes of the toxicity, but also treatments that are aimed towards removing toxicity, removing ama from the system. And we'll talk more about that later on. But if these toxins build up and we have symptoms showing, we know that the symptoms are nature's efforts to eliminate toxicity from the body. So say I have, like the example I was just using, say I have put too much heat into my body, and whether that is through too much hard work out in the sunshine without drinking enough water, or eating too much chili or too many other heating foods, or those sorts of things, I might, for example, tend to get diarrhea, and that is the body's way of eliminating that heat from the system. So we can look at symptoms as being signs that our body is trying to eliminate something. I might also sweat. Sweating is obviously a natural reaction to having too much heat in the body. But if the toxins that are building up over periods of time are not eliminated, then you go into full-on disease as opposed to just a state of imbalance. And the idea is to not let it get that far, to cut it off or to reverse it and go back into balance before one goes into a complete disease state. It's certainly easier to bring the body back into balance from a state of slight imbalance than from a state of severe imbalance or disease. And that's why Ayurveda places so much emphasis on the importance of healthy daily habits. So the general approach to healing in Ayurveda is to determine the constitution of the patient as well as which of any of their doshas are out of balance. And it could be one, it could be two, it could be all three. And you know that from interviewing and observing the patient and seeing what the symptoms are and what kinds of things that they're experiencing, as well as objective view of what's going on with their body. Like I said, the tongue is often examined as well as pulses, etc., and we'll talk about that more in the next part of this lecture. So then you need to look at and identify the cause of the imbalance of the doshas, and that can be, again, things from the inside or things from the outside, or behaviors, and behaviors are oftentimes the focus, and especially in modern culture, perhaps looking at the things that are stressing us out or the things that are preventing us from engaging with health supportive behaviors, because most of us in this day and age know what types of things we need to be doing to keep ourselves healthy, but we don't always do those, and so we have to look at sometimes the emotional drivers that keep us overworking and not spending enough time resting or playing or eating well, and those things as well. And then Ayurveda will apply individualized therapies, diet and lifestyle changes in order to return the doshas to balance. And again, there's sort of two major different aspects of that. One major aspect is, what is the foundation of health that's needed to be established in the person's daily habits and lifestyle, and what is the buildup of toxins in the system and what needs to be eliminated? What treatments will serve best to eliminate that toxic buildup? Because once the toxic buildup is removed, then the person's doshas will be more likely to come back into balance, even if they were to continue some of their bad behaviors, which of course is not ideal, because then it will just repeat the same cycle again. So we've come to the end of part 2. We have your revision questions here, and they are also listed on your LMS. And the other food for thought we have here now, based upon what you know currently about naturopathy and nutritional medicine, and I know we haven't got to those disciplines yet this semester. You may or may not have had any modality-specific subjects in that realm yet. But based on what you know right now, how might Ayurvedic medicine have influenced these disciplines historically? So I'll leave you with that, and we'll see you in part 3. Thank you for joining.